The dust kicked up around her ankles as she stumbled through the main street of Butte, Montana, clutching her side where blood seeped through the thin fabric of her dress. And Jonas Keller knew from one look at her desperate face that his quiet afternoon was about to change forever. He had been loading supplies onto his wagon outside the general store when she appeared like an apparition through the haze of July heat in 1877. Her dark hair hung loose and tangled around her shoulders, her green eyes wide with something between fear and determination. She took 3 more steps before her knees buckled. Jonas dropped the sack of flour he had been holding and crossed the distance between them in 4 long strides. He caught her just before she hit the ground, one arm around her back and the other beneath her knees. She weighed almost nothing, her body trembling against his chest. "Easy now," he said quietly, his voice steady despite the alarm coursing through him. "I have got you." Her eyes fluttered open, focusing on his face with difficulty. "They are coming," she whispered. "Please, I cannot let them find me." Jonas did not hesitate. He carried her swiftly toward his wagon, glancing down the street for any sign of pursuit. A few townspeople had stopped to stare, but no one approached. He settled her as gently as he could onto the wagon bed, where he quickly arranged his supplies to create a makeshift shelter around her. "Who is coming?" he asked, examining the wound at her side. It looked like a graze from a bullet, bleeding but not immediately life-threatening if he could get it cleaned and bandaged soon. "My uncle and his men," she said, her breathing shallow. "He wants to force me to marry his business partner. I ran when I had the chance, but they caught up to me a few miles back. I barely got away." Jonas felt anger tighten in his chest. He had seen too many women trapped by the cruelty of men who saw them as property rather than people. "What is your name?" "Maria. Maria Vance." "Maria, my name is Jonas Keller. I am going to take you somewhere safe, and then I am going to tend that wound. Can you hold on a bit longer?" She nodded weakly, and he covered her with a canvas tarp before climbing onto the wagon seat. He urged his horses forward, not toward his ranch just outside town, but toward a different destination entirely. His friend Samuel ran a small boarding house on the edge of Butte, and Samuel's wife Margaret was skilled with healing. More importantly, they were people he trusted with his life, and now with Maria's. The ride took 15 minutes that felt like hours. Jonas kept glancing back to make sure Maria remained conscious beneath the tarp. Each time he checked, her green eyes would meet his, filled with a trust he was not sure he deserved but was determined to honor. When they reached the boarding house, Samuel emerged from the barn, his weathered face creasing with concern as Jonas jumped down from the wagon. "I need Margaret," Jonas said without preamble. "I've got an injured woman here who needs help, and there might be men coming to look for her." Samuel did not waste time with questions. He called for his wife while helping Jonas lift Maria from the wagon bed. Margaret appeared in the doorway, her gray hair pulled back in a neat bun, her capable hands already reaching out. "Bring her inside, quickly now," Margaret said, leading them to a small bedroom on the first floor. They laid Maria on the bed, and Margaret immediately began examining the wound while Samuel pulled Jonas aside. "What is happening here?" Samuel asked quietly. Jonas explained what little Maria had told him, watching his friend's expression darken with each word. Samuel was a good man, one of the few Jonas had met in his 30 years who genuinely believed in doing right by others regardless of the cost. "She can stay here as long as she needs," Samuel said firmly. "If anyone comes asking, we have not seen her. Thank you, my friend." Jonas returned to the bedroom, where Margaret had already cleaned the wound and was applying a bandage. Maria's face had regained a bit of color, though she still looked fragile against the white pillows. "You are going to be fine," Margaret said gently. "The bullet just grazed you." Keep the wound clean and rest for a few days, and you will heal up properly." Maria's eyes found Jonas standing in the doorway. "Thank you," she said, her voice stronger now. "You saved my life. I do not even know how to begin repaying you." Jonas stepped into the room, removing his hat and turning it in his hands. "You do not owe me anything. No one deserves to be hunted and hurt." "Most people would have kept walking," Maria said. "Why did you help me?" He considered the question, thinking back to his own history, to the sister he had lost years ago because no one had been there to help her when she needed it most. "Because someone should have," he said simply. "And I was there." Margaret patted Maria's hand. "You rest now. I will bring you some broth in a little while. Jonas, come help Samuel outside for a moment." Jonas followed Margaret out of the room, closing the door softly behind him. In the hallway, she fixed him with a knowing look. "That girl has been through something terrible," Margaret said. "Not just today. You can see it in her eyes. She is going to need more than a bandage and a few days' rest." "I know," Jonas said. "But right now, keeping her safe is the first step." Samuel appeared from the front room, his expression troubled. "I rode into town quickly to have a word with Sheriff Dalton. Apparently, 3 men came through about an hour ago asking about a young woman matching Maria's description. They told the sheriff they were looking for a runaway niece, that her family was worried about her." Jonas felt his jaw tighten. Did the sheriff believe them? He seemed skeptical, but he does not have cause to turn them away without more information. "They are staying at the Grand Hotel." "Then we need to make sure they do not find out she is here," Jonas said. The 3 of them talked for several minutes, working out a plan to keep Maria hidden while she recovered. Jonas would stay at the boarding house for a few days, claiming he was helping Samuel with some repairs. If anyone came asking questions, Margaret would say she had no new guests. Over the following days, Jonas found himself drawn to Maria's room more often than strictly necessary. He would bring her meals, sit with her while she ate, and listen as she slowly began to tell him her story. Maria had been raised by her uncle after her parents died in a riverboat accident when she was 12. For the first few years, he had seemed kind enough, if distant. But as she grew older and more beautiful, his demeanor changed. He saw her as an asset, something to be traded for business advantage. When she turned 18 6 months ago, he had announced her engagement to Calvin Rhodes, a wealthy mine owner 20 years her senior with a reputation for cruelty. "I tried to refuse," Maria told Jonas on the 3rd evening, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea. They sat in her room with the window open, letting in the cool evening air. "But my uncle made it clear I had no choice. He said I owed him for raising me, for giving me a home. When I still refused, he locked me in my room and told me the wedding would happen whether I agreed or not." Jonas listened with a growing sense of anger at the injustice of it. "How did you escape?" "The housekeeper, Mrs. Chen. She felt sorry for me. She left my window unlatched one night and told me to run. I took a horse from the stable and rode for 2 days straight. I thought I had gotten far enough away, but they must have tracked me." She looked down at her hands. "I heard gunshots and then pain in my side. I do not remember much after that until I reached Butte and saw you." "You were incredibly brave," Jonas said. Maria met his eyes and something passed between them in that moment, a connection deeper than simple gratitude. "I was terrified," she admitted. "I still am. What if they find me? What if they take me back?" Jonas leaned forward, his voice firm with conviction. "They will not. I give you my word, Maria, you are not going back to that life." "You barely know me," she said softly. "Why would you make such a promise?" He thought about how to answer, about the way his heart had started beating differently whenever he was near her, about how her smile when he brought her breakfast made his entire day feel brighter. "Maybe I want to know you better," he said finally. If you would allow that. A faint blush colored her cheeks. I would like that very much. On the fifth day, Jonas was helping Samuel repair a section of fence when a rider approached. Jonas recognized him immediately as one of the ranch hands from the Double R, the spread owned by his neighbor Ruth Harrison. "Jonas," the young man called out, "Mrs. Harrison sent me to fetch you, says she needs to speak with you urgently." Jonas exchanged a glance with Samuel before nodding. "Tell her I will be there within the hour." After the rider left, Samuel said, "You think this is about Maria? Could be. Ruth has eyes and ears all over this county. If Maria's uncle has been making noise, Ruth would know about it." Jonas washed up and rode to the Double R, arriving just as the sun reached its zenith. Ruth Harrison met him on the porch of her ranch house, a tall woman in her 50s with silver hair and a no-nonsense demeanor that had earned her respect throughout Montana territory. "Jonas," she said, gesturing for him to sit. "I hear you have been staying at Samuel's place the past few days." "Helping with repairs," he says. "That is right," Jonas said carefully. Ruth poured 2 glasses of lemonade, handing him one. "I also hear that Cyrus Vance has been in town asking questions about his missing niece. Funny thing is, I know Cyrus. We have had business dealings over the years. And I know the kind of man he is." Jonas remained silent, waiting. "I also happen to know," Ruth continued, "that if a young woman was running from Cyrus Vance, she would have damned good reason, and anyone helping her would be doing the Lord's work." She fixed Jonas with a penetrating stare. "So if you happen to know anything about Maria Vance's whereabouts, I want you to understand that you have allies in this county, including me." Jonas felt relief wash through him. "Thank you, Ruth. That means more than you know. Cyrus left town yesterday, but he will be back. Men like him do not give up easily, especially when their pride is involved. You watch yourself, Jonas. And you tell that girl when you see her that Ruth Harrison says she has a right to choose her own path." Jonas rode back to the boarding house with renewed determination. He found Maria in the garden behind the house, helping Margaret pick vegetables. She wore a simple cotton dress borrowed from Margaret, her dark hair braided down her back. When she looked up and saw him, her face lit up with a smile that made his chest tighten. "You are up and moving," he observed, dismounting and walking over to them. "Margaret says the exercise is good for healing as long as I do not overdo it," Maria said. She looked healthier than she had since he found her, color in her cheeks and strength returning to her movements. Margaret excused herself tactfully, carrying a basket of vegetables back to the house. Jonas helped Maria settle onto a bench beneath an old cottonwood tree. "I spoke with Ruth Harrison today," he said. "She wants you to know you have friends here, people who will help protect you." Maria's eyes glistened with emotion. "I never expected such kindness from strangers. All my life, I was taught that people only help others when there is something to gain. But you, Samuel, Margaret, now Mrs. Harrison, you have all risked so much for me." "You are not a stranger anymore," Jonas said quietly. "At least not to me." She looked at him for a long moment, then reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were small and warm against his calloused palm. "When I was running, when I thought I might die out there in the heat, I kept thinking that I had never really lived. I had never made my own choices, never followed my own heart. And then you appeared and you caught me when I fell, and suddenly I had a chance at something different." Jonas squeezed her hand gently. "What do you want, Maria? If you could choose anything—" "I want to be free," she said immediately. "I want to wake up in the morning and decide for myself what my day will hold. I want to laugh without permission and speak without fear. I want—" She hesitated, then continued softly. "I want to know what it feels like to be cared for by someone who sees me as a person, not a possession." "You deserve all of that and more," Jonas said. They sat together in the dappled shade, talking about dreams and possibilities. Maria asked about Jonas's life, and he found himself telling her things he rarely shared. He told her about growing up in Texas, about his sister Anne who had died trying to escape an abusive husband, about how he had come to Montana 5 years ago seeking a fresh start. He talked about his small ranch, his horses, his hope of building something lasting and good. "It sounds wonderful," Maria said wistfully. "I have never had a place that felt like home." "Maybe you will find one here," Jonas suggested, his heart beating faster at the thought of her staying, of building a life that might include her. A week passed, then another. Maria grew stronger each day, helping Margaret around the boarding house and gradually venturing into town with Jonas or Samuel as escort. The people of Butte proved welcoming, asking few questions and offering quiet support. Maria started to relax, to smile more freely, to show the quick wit and gentle humor that had been buried under years of fear and control. Jonas visited every day, usually staying from morning until evening. He taught Maria to ride properly, taking her on gentle excursions through the hills around Butte. They talked endlessly, discovering shared opinions and complementary differences. She loved poetry while he preferred history. She was quick to laugh while he was more reserved, but her joy drew him out in ways he had not experienced before. They both loved the mountains, the open sky, the feeling of possibility that Montana territory offered. One afternoon, they rode to Jonas's ranch so Maria could see the place he had described so often. It was modest but well-maintained, a sturdy cabin with a stone fireplace, a barn for his horses, and a corral where he trained working animals for local ranches. Maria walked through the cabin slowly, taking in the simple furniture, the books on the shelves, the neat order of everything. "It is beautiful," she said, standing in the doorway and looking out at the mountains in the distance. "I can see why you love it here." Jonas stood beside her, acutely aware of her presence in his space, of how right it felt to have her there. "It has always felt a bit empty," he admitted, "like it was waiting for something." Maria turned to look at him, understanding in her eyes. The tension between them had been building for days, the attraction growing stronger with each shared moment. Jonas reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. Instead, she stepped closer. "Jonas," she whispered, and then his arms were around her and her lips were on his. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, a question and an answer all at once. Then it deepened, becoming something more urgent, weeks of growing feeling pouring into that moment. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless. "I have wanted to do that for so long," Jonas said, his forehead resting against hers. "I was hoping you would," Maria replied, her hands still clasped behind his neck. They stood together in the doorway of his cabin, holding each other as the sun began its descent toward the mountains. Jonas felt something settle in his chest, a rightness he had been searching for without quite knowing it. But underneath, the joy was a thread of worry. Maria was not truly free yet. Her uncle could still return, could still try to claim her. As if reading his thoughts, Maria said quietly, "I cannot hide forever. Eventually I will have to face him." "Then we will face him together," Jonas said firmly. "But not today. Today, let us just be here." They returned to the boarding house as twilight painted the sky purple and gold. Margaret had supper waiting, and the four of them ate together, the conversation easy and comfortable. Jonas noticed the glances Samuel and Margaret exchanged, the approval in their eyes as they watched him and Maria together. Later, as Jonas prepared to head back to his ranch for the night, Maria walked him outside. They stood by his horse, reluctant to part even for a few hours. "Thank you," Maria said, "for today, for all of it." You do not need to keep thanking me, Jonas replied, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Yes, I do. Because you carried me when I fell, Jonas, not just that first day, but every day since. You have been carrying me toward a life I never thought I could have. Her words hit him with unexpected force, and he pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her hair. Then let me keep carrying you, he said, for as long as you will let me. That might be a very long time, she warned, but her eyes were smiling. I am counting on it. The next morning brought unwelcome news. Jonas had just arrived at the boarding house when Sheriff Dalton rode up, his expression grim. Jonas, I need to speak with you and the young lady you have been protecting, the sheriff said without preamble. Jonas's muscles tensed, but he nodded and led the sheriff inside. Maria appeared from the kitchen, her face paling when she saw the lawman. Samuel and Margaret joined them in the sitting room, presenting a united front. Sheriff Dalton removed his hat and turned it in his hands, clearly uncomfortable. Miss Vance, I received a telegram this morning from the Territorial Marshal's office. Your uncle has filed a complaint claiming you stole a horse and money from his home. He is demanding your return to face charges. Maria's hand flew to her mouth. That is not true. I only took what was mine, some clothes and the few dollars my mother left me. And the horse, I admit I took it, but only because I had no other way to escape. I believe you, Sheriff Dalton said. But legally, if you were living in his house, he has a case, unless there is evidence of mistreatment or... He paused delicately. Unless you were fleeing genuine danger. She was fleeing a forced marriage, Jonas said hotly. Her uncle was going to marry her off to a man against her will. The sheriff sighed. That is not illegal, unfortunately. A guardian has the right to arrange marriages for dependents. The law is not on our side here. Then the law is wrong, Maria said, her voice shaking but determined. I will not go back. I would rather go to jail for horse theft than return to that house. Sheriff Dalton looked at her with sympathy. I was hoping you would say something like that, because there might be another option. He pulled a paper from his pocket. If you were married, your uncle would lose his legal guardianship. Your husband would become your legal representative, and he could drop any charges on your behalf. The room fell silent as everyone processed this. Jonas felt his heart begin to race. Are you suggesting she marry to avoid prosecution? Samuel asked carefully. I am suggesting that if Miss Vance were already married, say to a respectable local rancher, then her uncle's claims would have no standing. She would be beyond his reach legally. The sheriff looked between Jonas and Maria meaningfully. That would require someone willing to marry her, Margaret said slowly, her eyes on Jonas. Jonas did not hesitate. He crossed the room and knelt in front of Maria's chair, taking both her hands in his. Maria Vance, I know this is not romantic, and I know we have only known each other for a few weeks, but I also know that I have never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. I would be honored to be your husband, to protect you and care for you for the rest of my life, if you will have me. Maria's eyes filled with tears. Jonas, I cannot ask you to do this. Marriage is supposed to be about love, not legal protection. Who says it cannot be both? Jonas said softly. I love you, Maria. I think I started falling in love with you the moment I caught you in the street. This might be fast and it might be unconventional, but my feelings are real. So I am asking you not because of your uncle or the law, but because I want to build a life with you. Will you marry me? A tear spilled down Maria's cheek, but she was smiling. Yes, she whispered. Yes, Jonas, I will marry you. Because I love you too. I think I have since you promised to keep me safe, and you actually kept that promise. Jonas stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her soundly while Samuel and Margaret clapped and the sheriff permitted himself a small smile. Well then, Sheriff Dalton said, I suggest we make this official as quickly as possible. Judge Morrison can perform the ceremony today if you are willing." 2 hours later, Maria Vance became Maria Keller in a simple ceremony in Judge Morrison's chambers. She wore a dress borrowed from Margaret, altered quickly to fit. Jonas wore his best shirt and pants, his hair neatly combed. Samuel and Margaret stood as witnesses, along with Ruth Harrison, who had appeared as soon as she heard the news. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt. When Judge Morrison pronounced them husband and wife, Jonas kissed Maria with all the love and promise he could convey. Whatever had brought them to this moment, whatever complications still lay ahead, they would face them together now. The small group celebrated with a dinner at the boarding house, though the mood was tempered by the knowledge that Cyrus Vance would likely return. But for that evening, they focused on joy rather than fear. Margaret had baked a cake. Samuel provided champagne he had been saving for a special occasion, and Ruth regaled them with stories that had Maria laughing until her sides hurt. As the evening wound down and the guests departed, Jonas and Maria found themselves alone in the room that would be theirs for the night before they moved to the ranch. Maria sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly nervous. Jonas knelt in front of her, taking her hands. "We do not have to do anything you are not ready for," he said gently. "We can take this as slowly as you need." Maria smiled, touching his face with tender fingers. "I know. That is one of the many reasons I love you, but Jonas, I am ready. I want this. I want you. I want to start our life together in every way." Jonas kissed her softly, then with growing passion. They came together with tenderness and desire, discovering each other in the lamplight. Maria had known fear and control for so long, but in Jonas's arms, she found only love and respect, patience and passion in equal measure. When they finally lay together afterward, wrapped in each other's arms, she felt something she had never experienced before: complete safety, complete belonging. "What are you thinking?" Jonas asked, running his fingers through her loose hair. "That I am glad I fell," Maria said, "because you were there to catch me, and now I get to spend the rest of my life falling for you over and over again." Jonas held her closer, his heart full. "I will always catch you," he promised. "Always." They moved to Jonas's ranch the next day, beginning the work of building a life together. Maria threw herself into making the cabin a home, adding curtains and rugs, planting a garden, filling the space with warmth and life. Jonas taught her about the horses, and she proved to have a natural gift with them, her gentle manner calming even the most skittish animals. Days turned into weeks, and the love between them deepened. They learned each other's rhythms and habits, the small intimacies of daily life. Jonas discovered that Maria sang while she cooked, that she liked to read before bed, that she was afraid of spiders but fearless in thunderstorms. Maria learned that Jonas woke before dawn every day, that he had a dry sense of humor that surprised her into laughter, that he was unfailingly kind to every person and animal he encountered. 6 weeks after their wedding, a rider came to the ranch with news that Cyrus Vance had returned to Butte. Jonas felt Maria tense beside him as he read the note from Sheriff Dalton requesting their presence in town. "We knew this was coming," Jonas said, taking her hand. "I know," Maria replied. "I just wish it did not have to happen at all." They rode to town together, Maria sitting close to Jonas on the wagon seat. At the sheriff's office, they found not only Sheriff Dalton but also Judge Morrison and, to Jonas's surprise, Ruth Harrison. "Your uncle arrived this morning with Calvin Rhodes and a lawyer," Sheriff Dalton explained. "They are demanding to see you, claiming the marriage is invalid because you were not of sound mind when you consented to it." Maria's face flushed with anger. "That is absurd. I was perfectly sound of mind." "I know that, and so does everyone else in this room, the sheriff said. But we are going to need to face them down legally. Judge Morrison has agreed to hold a hearing this afternoon to settle the matter once and for all. Ruth stepped forward, her expression fierce. I have taken the liberty of engaging a lawyer on your behalf. Thomas Wright from Helena, one of the best in the territory. He arrived on the morning stage and has already been briefed on your situation. Ruth, we cannot afford, Jonas began, but Ruth waved him off. Consider it a wedding gift. No one bullies young women in my county if I can help it. The hearing was held in the courthouse, a tense affair that drew half the town as spectators. Cyrus Vance proved to be everything Maria had described: cold, arrogant, and convinced of his ownership rights over his niece. Calvin Rhodes sat beside him, a heavy man with cruel eyes that made Jonas's hands curl into fists. Their lawyer argued that Maria had been mentally unfit when she married Jonas, that she had been fleeing in a panic, and therefore could not have made a rational decision. He painted Jonas as a predator who had taken advantage of a vulnerable young woman. Thomas Wright, a sharp-featured man with intelligent eyes, systematically demolished their arguments. He called Margaret as a witness, who testified to Maria's clear thinking and rational behavior during her recovery. He called Sheriff Dalton, who confirmed that Maria had been coherent and determined when she married. He even called Ruth Harrison, whose respected voice carried weight with Judge Morrison. Finally, Wright called Maria herself to testify. Jonas watched proudly as his wife took the stand, her voice steady and strong. Miss Vance, the opposing lawyer began, but Maria interrupted. Mrs. Keller, she corrected firmly. My name is Maria Keller. The lawyer's face reddened. Mrs. Keller, then, is it not true that you were injured and frightened when you met your husband? Yes, I was injured. Yes, I was frightened, but I was not confused or irrational. I knew exactly what I was doing when I accepted Jonas's help, and I knew exactly what I was doing when I married him. You married him after knowing him for only a few weeks, the lawyer pressed. Is that rational behavior? I married him because in those few weeks, he showed me more respect, kindness, and genuine care than anyone had in my entire life, Maria said, her eyes finding Jonas in the courtroom. He offered me his strength when I was weak, carried me when I fell, and asked nothing in return. He gave me the freedom to choose my own path, including the freedom to choose him. That is not irrational. That is the smartest decision I ever made. The courtroom erupted in applause. Judge Morrison had to bang his gavel repeatedly to restore order. When the room finally quieted, he fixed Cyrus Vance with a stern look. Mr. Vance, I have heard nothing today that suggests your niece was anything but fully competent when she married Mr. Keller. Furthermore, I find your claim of theft to be dubious at best, given that multiple witnesses have testified to your attempts to force an unwanted marriage. This court finds the marriage of Jonas and Maria Keller to be valid and binding. Your guardianship is terminated. This hearing is concluded. Another round of applause followed. Jonas stood and made his way to Maria, pulling her into his arms as soon as she stepped down from the witness stand. Around them, people congratulated them and shot dark looks at Cyrus Vance and his companions. Vance stormed out of the courthouse, Rhodes following. At the door, Vance turned back, his face twisted with rage. You will regret this, Maria. You have thrown away wealth and position for a dirt-poor cowboy. When you are starving on that pathetic ranch, remember that you made this choice. Maria stepped away from Jonas, walking toward her uncle with her head held high. I would rather have one day of happiness with Jonas than a lifetime of comfort with you controlling my every move. I am not your property, uncle. I never was. Goodbye. She turned her back on him and took Jonas's hand. and they walked out of the courthouse together into the bright Montana sunshine. That night, they celebrated with their friends at the boarding house, and Jonas marveled at how different Maria looked now compared to the frightened woman he had caught in the street 2 months ago. She glowed with confidence and joy, laughing freely, her hand constantly seeking his. Late that night, lying in bed at the ranch, Maria turned to Jonas with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything, for seeing me as a person worth saving, for giving me a life worth living." Jonas kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "You saved yourself, Maria. You were the one who ran, who fought for your freedom. I just got to be there to catch you when you needed it. You carried me when I fell," she said, echoing the words she had spoken in court. "And now I get to stand beside you for the rest of our lives." The years that followed were not always easy, but they were rich with love and purpose. Jonas and Maria built their ranch into a thriving enterprise, known throughout Montana territory for the quality of their horses. Maria's gift with animals became legendary, and people traveled from distant towns to buy horses she had trained. They became pillars of the Butte community, known for their generosity and their willingness to help others in need. When they heard of women in situations similar to Maria's past, they quietly offered assistance, a place to stay, a chance to start fresh. Their home was always open, their table always ready for one more. 3 years after their wedding, Maria gave birth to their first child, a healthy baby boy they named James. Jonas held his son with shaking hands, overwhelmed by the perfection of this tiny person, the continuation of the love he shared with Maria. "He has your eyes," Maria said, exhausted but radiant. "He has your spirit," Jonas replied, kissing her forehead. "I can already tell." James was followed 2 years later by a daughter, Anne, named for Jonas's sister. Then another son, Thomas, named for the lawyer who had defended them. And finally, another daughter, Ruth, named for the woman who had stood by them from the start. The cabin expanded over the years, growing to accommodate their family. Jonas built additions with his own hands, each room filled with the sounds of children and laughter, the warmth of a family built on love and respect. On their 10th anniversary, Jonas and Maria stood on the porch of their home, watching the sun set over the mountains. Their children played in the yard, their voices carrying on the evening air. So much had changed since that July day when Maria had stumbled into Butte, bleeding and afraid. "You ever regret it?" Jonas asked, his arm around Maria's waist. "Marrying me so quickly under such strange circumstances?" Maria turned to look at him, her green eyes still able to make his heart skip a beat. "Not for a single moment. You gave me everything, Jonas. Freedom, safety, love, family. A life I never dreamed possible. You gave me just as much," Jonas said. "Before you, this was just a ranch. You made it a home. You made me complete." Maria leaned her head against his shoulder, content. "We made each other complete. That is how it was always supposed to be." They stood together as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, their children's laughter floating around them. Jonas thought about that moment 10 years ago when he had dropped the sack of flour and run to catch a falling woman. It had seemed like such a small decision at the time, just doing what any decent person would do. But that moment had changed everything, had set in motion a love story that continued to unfold with each passing day. "What are you thinking about?" Maria asked, tilting her head to look at him. "About falling and catching," Jonas said. "About how the best things in life often start with moments of crisis, moments when we have to decide who we want to be." "And who did you decide to be?" Maria asked, though she knew the answer. "The man who would always catch you when you fall," Jonas said, pulling her close. "The man who gets to love you for the rest of his life." "Then you succeeded," Maria whispered against his chest, "because I have never fallen since that day. You have held me up through everything, given me strength when I had none of my own." Their oldest son, James, came running up to the porch, his 8-year-old face alight with excitement. "Papa, Mama, come see. Thomas caught a frog and Anne is trying to name it." They laughed and followed their son into the yard, where their children gathered around a bucket containing one bewildered frog. Maria knelt beside Anne, helping her daughter consider appropriate names, while Jonas lifted Thomas onto his shoulders to survey their handiwork. Later, after the children were tucked into bed with stories and kisses, Jonas and Maria returned to their own room. The house was quiet now, peaceful. Maria brushed out her long dark hair, now streaked with a few threads of silver, while Jonas banked the fire in their bedroom fireplace. "I saw Ruth in town today," Maria said. "She is planning a big celebration for her 60th birthday next month. She wants us all there, including the children." "Of course we will go," Jonas said. "Ruth is family." It was true. Over the years, their definition of family had expanded beyond blood ties. Samuel and Margaret were aunt and uncle to their children. Ruth was a beloved grandmother figure. Sheriff Dalton, now retired but still sharp as a tack, was a favorite storyteller at family gatherings. Even Judge Morrison occasionally stopped by for Sunday dinner. Maria climbed into bed, and Jonas joined her, pulling her close. This was his favorite part of every day, these quiet moments when it was just the two of them, when he could hold her and feel grateful for every moment they had together. "Jonas," Maria said softly, "do you remember what I said to you that first night, about wanting to wake up and choose my own day?" "I remember," Jonas said. "I choose this," Maria said. "Every morning I wake up and choose you, choose our life, choose our family. I choose all of it, again and again." "And I choose you," Jonas replied, kissing her hair. "Every day, every moment, I will always choose you." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, secure in a love that had been forged in crisis, but strengthened through years of partnership, respect, and unwavering devotion. The seasons continued their cycle, years passing in a blur of children growing, the ranch prospering, the community strengthening. Jonas and Maria aged gracefully together, their love deepening rather than fading with time. They faced challenges as all couples do: harsh winters, difficult calving seasons, childhood illnesses that kept them up at night with worry. But they faced everything together, their partnership unshakable. James grew into a fine young man, as skilled with horses as his mother, as steady and dependable as his father. Anne inherited her mother's spirit and her father's determination, becoming a teacher in Butte. Thomas was the dreamer of the family, always reading, always imagining distant places. And Ruth, their youngest, had a talent for healing, often helping the town doctor with difficult cases. One autumn afternoon, when Jonas was 50 and Maria 45, they rode together to the spot where Jonas had first shown Maria his ranch. The land stretched out before them, golden with autumn grass, the mountains purple in the distance. The cabin had been expanded multiple times now, a substantial ranch house surrounded by well-maintained outbuildings. "Sometimes I can hardly believe this is our life," Maria said, her hand in Jonas's as they sat on their horses side by side. "It seems like a dream." "If it is a dream, I never want to wake up," Jonas replied. "You think about that day?" Maria asked. "The day we met?" "All the time," Jonas admitted. "I think about how different my life would be if I had not been there, or if I had chosen not to help. I cannot imagine a world where I did not know you, where we had not built this life together." "I think about it too," Maria said. "I think about how close I came to giving up, to just accepting the life my uncle had planned for me. But something kept me running, kept me moving forward even when I thought I could not go any further. Maybe some part of me knew you were waiting. Or maybe you are just incredibly brave, Jonas suggested. You always have been. You saved yourself, Maria. I just had the privilege of being there to help. Maria turned in her saddle to look at him fully. Even after 20 years of marriage, Jonas still felt his breath catch at her beauty. Age had only refined it, adding character and depth to her features. We saved each other, Maria said firmly. You were alone out here, building a life but living it in solitude. I gave you family, love, partnership. You gave me freedom and safety and a place to belong. We each gave the other what they needed most. Jonas knew she was right. Before Maria, his life had been about surviving, about building something from nothing. After Maria, his life became about truly living, about sharing every joy and sorrow with someone who understood him completely. They rode back to the ranch as the sun began to set, arriving to find their home full of noise and activity. James had brought his new wife Sarah for dinner. Anne had arrived from town with her fiancé David. Thomas was home from his studies in Helena. And little Ruth, now 16, was cooking enough food to feed a small army. The dinner table that night was crowded and loud, filled with laughter and conversation, debates and stories. Jonas sat at the head of the table with Maria beside him, and he looked around at the faces of their children and the people they loved. This, he thought, this was what he had been working toward his entire life without quite knowing it. Not just a successful ranch, but a family, a legacy of love. After dinner, as the younger people gathered in the parlor for music and games, Jonas and Maria slipped outside to the porch. The night was cool and clear, stars scattered across the black sky like diamonds. 20 years, Jonas said, pulling Maria close. Has it really been 20 years? 20 years since the hearing, Maria clarified. 22 since you caught me in the street. 21 since you made me your wife. Best decision I ever made, Jonas said. Second best, Maria corrected with a smile. The first best was choosing to help a stranger in need. Jonas laughed, the sound warm in the darkness. You are right, as always. They stood together in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of their children's laughter drifting from inside. This was happiness, Jonas thought. Not the absence of difficulty, but the presence of love strong enough to weather any storm. Years continued to pass, bringing both joy and sorrow as all years do. Samuel passed away peacefully in his sleep at 78, with Margaret following him just 6 months later, her heart apparently unable to continue without her beloved husband. The losses hit Jonas and Maria hard, but they comforted each other and helped each other through the grief, just as they had through everything else. Ruth Harrison lived to 91, sharp and spirited until the very end. At her funeral, she was remembered not just for her successful ranch, but for her fierce advocacy for justice, particularly for women and children. Jonas gave part of the eulogy, his voice breaking as he thanked Ruth for standing by them when they had needed it most. The children grew and started their own families. James took over the main operations of the ranch, proving to be an excellent manager with new ideas that built on his parents' foundation. Anne and David opened a school in Butte, educating children from all backgrounds. Thomas became a writer, his stories about Montana life gaining recognition throughout the territory. Ruth, true to her calling, became a nurse, working alongside the town doctor. Jonas and Maria became grandparents, then great-grandparents. Their home remained the center of family gatherings, the place where everyone returned for holidays and special occasions. Despite their advancing age, they remained active and engaged, still working the ranch alongside James, still hosting Sunday dinners, still clearly and obviously in love. On their 40th anniversary, their children organized a massive celebration. The entire town of Butte turned out, along with people from across Montana territory who had known Jonas and Maria over the decades. There were speeches and toasts, music and dancing, enough food to feed everyone twice over. When it came time for Jonas and Maria to speak, they stood together in front of the crowd, holding hands as they had for 4 decades. Jonas looked out at all the faces, many of them only alive because of the family he and Maria had built together, the values they had instilled, the example they had set. 40 years ago, Jonas began, his voice still strong at 70. I was standing in the street in Butte, loading supplies onto my wagon. I was content enough, I suppose, but I was alone. And then Maria came into my life and everything changed. She taught me that strength is not just about what you can carry, but about being willing to share the load with someone else. She taught me that love is not about ownership or control, but about freedom and partnership. He turned to look at Maria, who stood beside him radiant at 65, her hair now white but her green eyes still bright. Maria has made me better in every way. She has given me a life richer than I ever imagined possible. So I want to say in front of all of you, thank you. Thank you for falling into my life. Thank you for trusting me to catch you. Thank you for every day of these 40 years. Maria wiped tears from her eyes before speaking. Jonas likes to talk about catching me, about offering his strength when I was weak. And it is true, he did catch me that day in the street. But what he does not talk about is all the times since then when I have caught him, when he has needed strength and I have been there to offer it. That is what marriage is, what partnership is. It is taking turns being strong for each other. It is falling and being caught, over and over again, knowing that the other person will always be there. She squeezed Jonas's hand. You carried me when I fell, Jonas Keller, and I have spent 40 years trying to carry you just as faithfully. I love you more today than I did on our wedding day, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today. That is my promise to you, for as long as we both live. The celebration continued long into the night, but eventually Jonas and Maria slipped away to their bedroom. They were tired, their bones aching in ways they never had when they were young, but they were content. They prepared for bed slowly, helping each other with buttons that had become difficult for arthritic fingers, settling under the quilts with grateful sighs. 40 years, Maria said softly. Where did the time go? Into every moment we have lived, Jonas replied. Into our children and grandchildren, into this ranch, this community, into loving each other. Do you have any regrets? Maria asked. Jonas considered the question seriously. Their life had not been perfect. They had lost people they loved. They had faced financial difficulties, especially in the early years. There had been arguments and misunderstandings, times when they had hurt each other despite their best intentions. No, he said finally. I do not regret anything because all of it, good and bad, led us here. And here is exactly where I want to be. Me too, Maria whispered, snuggling closer. Me too. They drifted off to sleep, still holding hands as they had every night for 4 decades. Outside, the Montana wind whispered through the pines, and the stars wheeled overhead in their ancient dance. The ranch, the family, the love they had built, all of it would continue long after they were gone. A legacy of 2 people who had found each other in a moment of crisis and chosen love every day since. As Jonas and Maria entered their 70s, they gradually stepped back from the daily operations of the ranch, trusting James and his children to carry on the work. But they remained vital parts of the family and community, their wisdom sought on important matters, their presence still a source of comfort and joy. One spring morning when Jonas was 75 and Maria 70, They took their customary walk around the property. It was something they did most days when the weather allowed, holding hands and talking about everything and nothing. On this particular morning, they walked to the small family cemetery on a hill overlooking the ranch, where Samuel and Margaret rested alongside Ruth Harrison and others they had loved. "I want to be buried here," Maria said, looking out over the valley. "Right here beside you, so we can watch over the ranch together for eternity." "That is still a long way off," Jonas said, though his voice lacked conviction. They were both healthy for their age, but they were not young anymore, and they both knew time was finite. "Maybe," Maria agreed. "But when the time comes, whenever that is, I want you to know I have no regrets, Jonas. My only sorrow will be leaving you." "Then we will go together," Jonas said, only half joking. "I cannot imagine existing in a world without you in it." They returned to the house to find it full of visitors. Their great-grandchildren were staying for the week, and the house rang with their shouts and laughter. Jonas and Maria settled into their chairs on the porch, watching the younger generations play in the yard much as their own children had done decades before. "We did good," Maria said softly. "We did very good," Jonas agreed. That night, lying in bed, Maria suddenly said, "Tell me the story." Jonas knew immediately which story she meant. It was one they returned to often, especially as they grew older. "Once upon a time," he began, his voice warm with affection, "there was a cowboy in Montana Territory who thought he knew what his life would be. And then one hot July day, a beautiful woman fell into his life and everything changed." "She did not fall," Maria corrected, as she always did. "She stumbled. There is a difference. She stumbled," Jonas amended with a smile. "And the cowboy caught her, never realizing that in catching her he was really catching his own future, his own happiness." "The woman was scared," Maria continued, taking up the story. "She had run so far and fought so hard, and she was nearly broken. But the cowboy was strong enough to carry her when she could not carry herself. He gave her shelter and safety, and then he gave her something even more precious. He gave her choice." "The woman chose freedom," Jonas said. "And in choosing freedom, she chose the cowboy. And the cowboy, who had been alone for so long, suddenly was not alone anymore. He had a partner, a love, a reason for everything he did." "They built a life together," Maria whispered, her eyes closing. "They built a family, a home, a legacy. They faced hard times and good times, and through all of it, they loved each other. They caught each other when they fell. They carried each other when one was weak. They were two people who became one partnership, stronger together than they ever could have been apart." "And they lived happily ever after," Jonas concluded, kissing her forehead. "We are living it now," Maria murmured, already half asleep. "Our happily ever after. It is not perfect, but it is real and it is ours." Jonas held her as she drifted off, his heart full of love and gratitude. Whatever time they had left, whether years or months or days, he would treasure every moment. Because Maria was right. They were living their happily ever after, had been living it for over 40 years. The fairy tales never talked about the reality of happily ever after, about aging and aching joints, and the sorrows that inevitably came with a long life. But they also did not talk about the depth of love that grew between two people who chose each other every day, who carried each other through decades of life's joys and sorrows. 2 more years passed, beautiful years filled with family and love. Jonas and Maria celebrated their 42nd anniversary surrounded by 4 generations of the family they had created. They were slower now, more fragile, but their love remained as strong as ever. One October evening, as the leaves turned gold and red on the mountains, Maria complained of being tired and went to bed early. Jonas found her there an hour later, sleeping peacefully, a slight smile on her face. He climbed in beside her, wrapping his arms around her as he had done countless times before. In the morning, she did not wake up. Jonas knew immediately. There was a stillness to her, an absence that he felt in his very soul. He held her for a long time, tears streaming down his face, telling her over and over that he loved her, that she had made his life worth living, that he would see her again. The funeral was the largest Butte had ever seen. Maria had touched so many lives over her 7 decades, and people came from across Montana and beyond to pay their respects. She was laid to rest in the family cemetery on the hill, just as she had requested, in a spot that overlooked the ranch she had helped build. Jonas tried to go on. His children and grandchildren rallied around him, staying close, making sure he was never alone. But he was only going through the motions. The light had gone out of his life when Maria left it. Food lost its taste. Sunrises lost their beauty. Everything was gray without her. He lasted 3 months. On a cold January morning, James found his father sitting in his favorite chair on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, looking out over the ranch with a peaceful expression on his face. He had passed quietly in the night, his heart apparently deciding it had had enough of beating without Maria to beat for. They buried Jonas beside Maria, their graves marked with a single large stone that read, "Jonas and Maria Keller. He caught her when she fell. She carried him through life. Together forever." The ranch continued under James's stewardship, and then his sons, and then his grandsons. The story of Jonas and Maria became family legend, told and retold to each new generation. Children grew up hearing about the great-great-grandfather who had offered his strength to a stranger in need, and the great-great-grandmother who had said, "You carried me when I fell," and how that moment had sparked a love that lasted a lifetime and created a legacy that continued on. And sometimes, on summer evenings when the wind blew just right, people swore they could see 2 figures walking hand in hand on the hill by the cemetery, an old cowboy and the woman he loved, still together in whatever came after this life, still carrying each other through eternity as they had promised to do so many years before. Their love story had ended, but what they built together lived on through the children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and beyond. A legacy not just of land and horses, but of love, respect, and the unwavering belief that 2 people together could create something beautiful that would outlast them both. Jonas had caught Maria when she fell that day in Butte, but in truth, they had caught each other. 2 souls finding exactly what they needed in the most unexpected moment. And from that moment had flowed decades of love, a family that spanned generations, and a story that would be told as long as the ranch stood on the Montana plains, a testament to the power of choosing love, choosing partnership, and choosing to carry each other through whatever life brought.